welcome to KCS at Home Learning. This is our summer edition. To start off, if this video is hard to understand, here are 4 steps that you can go through to problem solve. Okay, so let's get started. This is 5th grade social studies. My name is Natalie Pratt, and I'm a 5th grade teacher at North Shore Elementary School, and I teach social studies and science. Okay, so what we're going to be looking at today, our success criteria, is to describe the effects of the Great Depression on Tennessee and the impact of the New Deal, focusing mainly on TVA and CCC. So we'll dive into that in just a second. And then after that, we're going to look at Tennessee's contributions during World War I and World War II, including the conversion of factories to wartime production. I get to talk about Oak Ridge, which is really, really exciting. And then I'm going to wrap it up with some notable Tennesseans, Cornelia Fort, Cordell Hull, and Alvin C. York. So if you have your Gallopade book at home, I'm going to be focusing today on chapters 30 and 31. My suggestion is watch the video, get the good background knowledge that you need, and then go into that workbook, read the passages, and do the tasks as a follow-up. Okay? So you should remember all about the Great Depression, World War I, and World War II. I'm sure you remember all of it, right? Well, if you don't, I'm going to review it today. So, yes, this is Tennessee history. However, I will go over the Great Depression with you a little bit, then tie in how it affected Tennesseans. Same thing with World War I and World War II. I'll give you a little preview of, or actually not preview, a review of those, since that is prior learning, and then I'll dive in and add in the Tennessee history. So, let's go back to the Great Depression. Clearly not a great time in our nation's history. It was one of the hardest times that we've known. It all started with the stock market crash in 1929, and then the Great Depression lasted well into the 1930s. In Tennessee, it pretty much got hit the way that the rest of the nation got hit. Banks didn't have money, and if banks don't have money, people can't pay their mortgages, and basically they had to move into these shabby homes in these shanty towns, if you can remember all of that was going on. In Tennessee, farmers were hit especially hard because crop prices fell, and when those fall, they had no source of income, so therefore, again, families in the cities had to move out to the country with hopes of survival. Another thing that happened in Tennessee was African Americans had it especially hard when whites took the jobs that they had traditionally performed. So therefore, the domino effect of the Great Depression affected everyone as jobs were lost and then others took other people's jobs. So a horrible, situation that a lot of people were put in. One thing that was interesting that I found were the Cumberland homesteads. These were farmsteads, and they were created for more than around 200 families. It had common areas for growing crops, for animal grazing, and timber. It was all shared. Super interesting because it provided a place, these homesteads, for people to go. Unemployed workers in Tennessee built the homes, providing even more benefit for the citizens and providing jobs. So, pretty neat. During this time, we have Franklin D. Roosevelt, our 32nd president, and he didn't want to see this suffering go on any longer, so he came up with a plan. Do you guys remember what that plan's called? Hopefully you thought, I think that was the New Deal. So if you did, you were correct. So Roosevelt created this New Deal, which developed government programs to help the nation recover after the Great Depression. The 2 that we're going to look at today are the Civilian Conservation Corps, or the CCC, and the TVA, which was Tennessee Valley Authority. Clearly, they were more involved in the New Deal, and hopefully you remember some of those other ones that were created that we looked at when we focused strictly on the New Deal and not just Tennessee. So you learned a lot more than just those 2, but those are the 2 that we're going to look at today. Okay, starting with the CCC. The Civilian Conservation Corps. This put young men back to work, preserving the nation's natural resources. And of course, natural resources nature, things like that you've got to think about. So it employed thousands of men. They planted trees, they built state parks, and they worked on projects to conserve soil and prevent erosion. So the CCC here is a primary source image of a worker planting a tree to stop soil erosion. Okay, so the TVA, I'm going to move me over here since I'm blocking some of that. The TVA is the Tennessee Valley Authority, and this helped transform this helped transform the river valley from poverty to productivity. Flooding used to cause massive problems for farmers. However, when the TVA came in and built these dams to control the flooding, it also generated electricity to the homes and the farms. And this provided electricity to areas that might not originally or previously had electricity or access to it. So it was super important to a lot of areas, and it also produced local jobs. Okay, so what I found, move me again over here, is some local dams that you could go visit. Norris Dam State Park. I know that my family, we've been there a lot. I grew up near this area, and you park over here and you can kind of walk around. There's walking trails, and it's really, really neat to see how the dam works and what TVA did in this area locally. And there's signs up along the walking areas that kind of tell you information about the area. But that is really, really interesting to visit there. And there's hiking trails as well. So we actually went there probably about a month ago. So if you want more information on that, head on over to Tennessee History for Kids and let History Bill teach you some more. So you can go over there and search up Norris Dam and learn more. There's also Fort Loudon Dam, and this was a dam built in the early 1940s to provide electricity and flood control in the Tennessee Valley. So 2 local dams that are really neat. Okay, so go ahead right now. After I give the directions, I'm going to ask you to pause and see if you can find the 7 states in the Tennessee Valley region that were part of the TVA program. So go ahead right now, look at this map, pause the video, and then jump back on and we'll go over them together. Okay, so I hope you found them. Let's look. First, of course, Tennessee. I mean, look how, TVA clearly affected our entire state. So we've got Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi. We've got Kentucky, Virginia, North Carolina, and Georgia. So awesome. Hopefully you got all of those correct. There you go. Okay, so that's pretty much wrapping up the Great Depression, Tennessee, talking about the CCC and the TVA. If you're interested to do a little bit more review, there's always Brain Pop. Love them. You can go on there, watch video, take a quiz, and that you can you can search up New Deal, and that's the one that you could watch that would match this. Of course, there's always a vocabulary, a fun rap, and you can go in there and search up Great Depression and review a little bit more. Okay, so let's move on to World War I, which was 1914. So hopefully you remember what happened in World War I. If you didn't, just to do a little rapid recall, we've got over here in Europe 2 different sides arising in this war. We've got the Allied powers and we have the Central powers, and those are defined by color on your map right there. Okay, so this was a war that we didn't want to get involved in. We were across an ocean from this, and we wanted to stay isolated. And it was called isolationism, meaning we did not want to be part of this war at all. It wasn't our battle to fight. However, we did want to help our friends out, and our friends were the Allied powers. And so we did help out by sending merchant ships with food to devastated areas in Europe. And then we might have also blocked some food going to Germany as well. So we didn't want to get involved. However, we did want to help our friends. However, Germany is going to cause us it's going to force us to go into war with everyone. So basically, 2 of the main things that I'll talk about really quickly were that Germany ended up sinking the ship Lusitania. If you can remember, that was a passenger ship. It should have never been shot down, and when it was, it involved 128 Americans. So clearly that right there was one of the things that led the United States into joining in the war. And then we also found out about a telegram called the Zimmerman telegram. If you remember, that was between Germany and Mexico. So once we found out about those two things, basically the United States was like, okay, we're doing this. We're going to war. So on April 6, 1917, the United States entered the war. Of course, we joined the Allied powers and declared war on Germany. So that's how we got involved in World War I. But what was happening in Tennessee? Well, Tennessee sent more than 100,000 soldiers. Women served as nurses. We have blacks and whites were working in factories to support the war efforts. And then we have those wonderful victory gardens that were planted. So Tennessee was helping out on its own. And then we also had some factories that helped out. We have the DuPont factory at Old Hickory near Nashville. They produce more gunpowder than any other place in the world. That's crazy. We have Parkfield in Millington became a pilot training site. And I actually read up more about that, and it was really interesting. So if you're interested, that was an interesting topic to Google. Okay, so basically, Tennessee, all these people were doing all of this. And then on November 11th, 1918, the Central Powers ended up surrendering. And we refer to this day as Veterans Day. So we gave Germany a list of things that they needed to do. However, we will only have around 20 years of peace until our next big war. So that was a super fast World War I review, and including how Tennessee was involved with that. And if you're interested, you can always hop on over to Brain Pop, review more on World War I, of course, and then we've got the classic vocabulary, which you can go on over there, search World War I. Okay, so World War II, 1939 to 1945, we go back to war. If you remember, we didn't want to be in World War I. We don't want to be in World War II either. But this war was between the Axis powers and the Allied powers. We have this guy over here. Probably remember him from prior lessons. Adolf Hitler. It was enforcing strict policies against the Jewish and was blaming basically the Jews for all of Germany's problems. So what that's going to lead us into is us not wanting to join, like I mentioned, and Congress will eventually pass this Lend-Lease Act that will allow Roosevelt to lend or lease weapons and supplies to any country whose defense was critical to our security in the United States. So as the battling again is happening an ocean away, and we're not wanting to get involved in it, clearly we still want to be able to help if possible. So even though we were trying to stay out of this war, a horrific event happened on December 7th, 1941. You probably remember this. I know that I spent an entire day, I think even a little bit longer than that, going over all of the things that happened at Pearl Harbor and the effects. I mean, this was a horrific event that plunged us into this war. So talking about it on December 7th, Japanese bombers struck around 8 o'clock a.m. before a lot of the Americans were even awake. And over 2,000 Americans were killed. 8 U.S. battleships were lost, 13 other ships were lost, and 188 airplanes were lost. So this was a horrible, horrible event. Wish I could spend more time on it, but clearly I have a lot to cover today. So after Pearl Harbor, this is a primary source of Roosevelt signing the declaration of war against Japan in the wake of the attack of Pearl Harbor, which was in Hawaii. So also part of World War II, there's such a big chunk of information that I don't even have time I get to go over, but there was the Holocaust, there was D-Day, VE Day, the Battle of Midway, atomic bombs, which I do get to come back to those. So I'm excited that I get to talk about those in a little bit more detail. And then there was VJ Day. So even though I just really pretty much talked about Pearl Harbor, there's all of these other events that were major, of course, during that war. So going into Tennessee. So Tennessee played a part, even though this battle was overseas. Overall, we sent over 300,000 soldiers to fight. And then what I'm really going to focus in is Tennessee factories stopped producing products and began producing things needed for the war. And I'm going to go into more detail on that in just 1 second. Okay, so what did Tennessee do? We bought the war bonds. We planted the victory gardens. And we started to save scrap metal and paper. So we're still doing a lot of the same things that we did during World War I. But the big change that we see in World War II is our factories converting. So what that means is they were producing one good, and it might have been something simple or something like a car part, and then now they'll produce something for airplanes. So they're changing based on what the needs are for the war. So an example right here, it was in Memphis. There were two manufacturers that actually changed from making automobile parts to making aircraft parts. So clearly during this time, probably not a lot of automobiles were being purchased. So in order to help the wartime effort, they started making aircraft parts, which is really neat. Other companies switched over and produced chemicals, medicines, explosive shells, and in Chattanooga, factories converted to produce war products in steel, iron, textile, and chemical plants. So we have a lot going on in Tennessee with helping out with the wartime production. Specifically in Kingsport, we have the Tennessee Eastman Company manufactured explosives. And in Nashville, factories produced aircraft, minesweepers, and submarine chasers. So really neat how our state started to produce those products that were needed. Okay, so really excited about this element inside of the standard that I get to talk about Oak Ridge. So I kind of dove into the rabbit hole of Oak Ridge once I learned that I got to talk about it, and I've been researching it a lot. And it is so interesting. So interesting, I'm actually reading a book right now about Oak Ridge because I wanted to know more. I can't gobble up enough information. So 1942, during World War II, America became concerned that Germany was going to create this atomic bomb. Therefore, the U.S. saw it imperative to create its own bomb. Of course, they got a bomb, we need a bomb, right? So Roosevelt approved this top secret, like crazy top secret Manhattan Project to build an atomic bomb. So what we have is one of the locations that was selected is in Oak Ridge, actually in East Tennessee, about 30 minutes away, so really close to us. And engineers literally came in and built complex facilities in a town for the workers to live in. This was all farmland before, and they literally came in and bought the land from all the people and built the factories and the facilities in this town to build this to parts of that, well, to enrich uranium. So Oak Ridge was called the Secret City. Wasn't on any map, okay? And thousands were brought in to enrich this uranium. The work was so secret that most of the workers didn't even know what they were doing. They had no idea. They were basically told, do your job, and that's it. They didn't know what they were actually doing. So super neat. So why are we talking about this? On August 6th, 1945, Truman made the decision to drop an atomic bombs on Japan. Well, guess where the enriched uranium came from inside of those atomic bombs? Oak Ridge. So right in our backyard, crazy. So those bombs were created, and basically after they were dropped, it resulted in Japan surrendering, which is what we now call the J-Day. So at the end of the day, we can pretty much say that the work done in Oak Ridge helped and largely contributed to the end of World War II, which is mind-blowing. So I found this really neat video about Oak Ridge, and I thought you guys would enjoy it.
A few miles northwest of Knoxville is a town that was born in secrecy. Oak Ridge, Tennessee is 10 miles long and 2 miles wide. The whole thing surrounded by a high chain-linked fence, topped with barbed wire and patrolled by guards on horseback. This area used to be filled with small farming towns until 1942. America was at war, and suddenly the farmers here began getting visits from federal officials. They only wanted one thing: all of the land. Reluctantly, and with little choice, 1,000 families left their small farming communities, and soon thousands of engineers, scientists, and construction workers swarmed into the new land. Construction began, and 3 huge windowless buildings were erected within months. Oak Ridge had a secret. Of the 75,000 people who lived and worked here, only 1% knew what was really going on. Workers were told, "Loose lips sink ships." Meanwhile, some of the most brilliant scientific minds in the United States were working to produce the most powerful bomb the world had ever known. Oak Ridge was part of the Manhattan Project, the American government's highly secret initiative to develop an atomic bomb. And on August 6, 1945, when America dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, it ultimately brought World War II to an end. Even today, aircraft must keep their distance from the site, and the buildings are still used by the United States Department of Energy for federal projects.
Okay, so that was just a little bit more information. Gave you a visual. I really enjoyed that video. Okay, so just to provide a couple more primary sources for you to look at, this was the cover of the Knoxville News Sentinel, which is our Knoxville newspaper. And this was on August 6, 1945, and this was after the atomic bomb was dropped clearly, and it shows how this is like their breaking news was that it was made in Oak Ridge. And so really neat. I thought that was pretty fun to see that. And you can also see that the newspaper, really neat, this is a neat concept, was 5 cents. 5 cents. Yeah, think about that in 1945. Okay. I found this image, thought it was really interesting, of a woman sitting and she's doing dials and meters. And the more I'm reading up on all of this, it was interesting how many women worked in Oak Ridge during this time period. What I heard was that they weren't told what they were doing. They were told to only sit there and look at the dials, and if it gets off, to adjust it and get it back. And they were trained on how to do that, but they didn't really know what they were doing. Okay, another primary source, which I'm actually going to include in the task this week, is the billboards. Now, this is really interesting. If you go and Google billboards in Oak Ridge during World War II, with parental, guidance, you can see they were really crazy. All of them were basically like, you're not allowed to talk to anybody. You don't tell anybody what anybody's doing up here. So this was the most famous one of what you see here, what you do here, what you hear here, when you leave here, let it stay here. Basically telling them they have to keep their work a secret because this was a gigantic secret. Again, it wasn't even on a map. No one even knew the job they were doing was to create an atomic bomb. Okay, so if you're interested, of course, in more information on World War II, go hop on Brain Pop. Tons of information online, causes of World War II, and the World War II video on Brain Pop. They were really good. So let's wrap this lesson on up with Tennesseans. So one notable Tennessean was Alvin C. York, and he was one of the most decorated soldiers of World War I. He was born in Tennessee, drafted into the Army, and he was an excellent shooter. They said that he was an excellent shooter because of his hunting back home before he was drafted. It was said that he killed around 25 of the enemy, captured 132 prisoners, and at the end of the day, he won the Congressional Medal of Honor. There's a lot of information you can actually find out about him. When I started researching him, there's some documentaries on him as well. Cornelia Ford was from Nashville. She was a flight instructor, and actually during Pearl Harbor, she was one of the ones that spotted a Japanese plane, and she was forced to fly through all this machine gun fire, and at the end of the day, was barely even able to land her plane, but she was part of all of that. She campaigned for war bonds, and she joined the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron. And during a flight from one base to another, she was actually killed, becoming the first WAFS pilot to die on a mission. So that's Cornelia. And then to wrap it up, we have Cordell Hull. Cordell was born in Olympus, Tennessee. This is really interesting. He was a U.S. congressman. He was a U.S. senator. He was Secretary of the State for President Roosevelt. crazy. And he basically drew up the plans for peace, which we would now call the United Nations. So, very interesting man. And to wrap him up, he won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1945. Okay, so to review what all we looked at today, basically during the Great Depression, Tennessee saw what the rest of the nation was seeing, people just trying to get by. However, when Roosevelt created the New Deal plan in Tennessee, the CCC and the TVA gave thousands of men jobs, and it helped get the state back up from the Great Depression. Tennessee played a large role in World War I and World War II by sending soldiers, planting victory gardens. And the biggest thing was us converting our factories to produce those wartime needs. And then, of course, locally we have Oak Ridge, and they played a large role because they enriched the uranium that went into the atomic bomb, which we can say contributed to the end of World War II. So, your task this week, there's 3 elements. The first one is a writing task. And basically, you would be writing them from the perspective of a child during World War II, explaining the choices your family had to make for the war effort. Now, you can use your textbook to go back and look at even more that happened during World War II. You can go online, however you want to do that. But that's a writing element. And then on task 2, there's analyzing a primary source. Going back to that billboard, you're going to be answering 3 questions about that billboard that help you dive deeper into the understanding of what it was really saying. And then task 3, I thought would be fun. You get to create a billboard. So after you go online, if you have access, you can look at some of the other ones and how they basically were telling the workers, shh, don't tell anyone what you're doing. You're not allowed to tell anyone. And you could look at some of those to get inspiration, or look at the one above for inspiration, and then draw it in the space below or on the back. So I thought that'd be fun. Writing, analyzing, and creating. Okay, guys, thanks for learning and reviewing with me today. Hope everyone's doing great. Thanks.